Are you interested in improving the sound of your CD player? An external DAC can help enhance the sound of your CD collection, but only if you choose the right one. But here's the problem. A lot of people simply don't know where to start when choosing the right DAC for their CD player. Hi there, my name is Aaron, and in today's video, I'll walk you through everything you need to know to pick the right DAC for your CD player. Plus, I'll show you common mistakes to avoid because, let's face it, none of us want to buy the wrong gear. Stick around to the end and I'll share the #1 mistake even experienced audiophiles make when upgrading their DAC. Before we start, a quick reminder that the job of a DAC is to simply convert the ones and zeros stored on your CD to an analog signal that we can hear. Your CD player already has an internal DAC, but adding an external DAC can bring out new and interesting details in your CD collection, kind of like improving the sound of your vinyl playback by adding an external phono preamp or upgrading the cartridge on your turntable. Now, I remember buying my first DAC, this one right here, for just $99 about 5 years ago, and I remember how stressful it was trying to decide which one to buy. In this video, I'll walk you through 4 steps to hopefully help make the decision easier for you. And if you stick around to the end of this video, I'll even provide you a way to reach out to me directly if you have any further questions. Now, the first thing to take into consideration is to try to determine what features you actually need on a DAC. Because there's so many DACs being released now that they offer a lot of features when the reality is you maybe only needed to do 1 or 2 things. When we're talking about buying a DAC for a CD player, there's a good chance that CD player is already hooked up to your stereo system, and so you don't need volume control. However, a lot of DACs on the market today offer a preamp option, which means that you can use them to also control volume, right? So these are just a few examples here where you can not only use this as a DAC, but also as a preamp. Now, honestly, when I first started, all I bought was just this schiit Modi DAC. And you'll note there's no volume control. There's really hardly anything to it at all. It's just a little box that sits there and does its job. If you really don't need your DAC to act as a preamp, there's a good chance you can save money by just buying something like this schiit Modi DAC, or even the SMSL SU1. Also, you may buy a DAC where you can just turn the preamp functions off altogether. For instance, on this Fosse, you can simply click this button here, that switch, and it goes to bypass, and it goes to off, and depending on which section, you're either using it as a DAC only or with volume control. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Do you really need a preamp? If not, you might just be fine looking for something simple like this. Now, the second feature to consider is Bluetooth streaming. Do you even want it on your DAC? This Fosse offers Bluetooth streaming, and this SMSL, it even has Bluetooth streaming, even though I don't have the antennas connected. But honestly, if you already have like a Wii Mini that you're using for wireless streaming, there's a good chance that you don't need to pay more money to have Bluetooth streaming added to your DAC. Another feature consideration is simply the outputs. Now, when I first started, again, on this Modi DAC, all it had were RCA outputs, and that is all I needed. I used this coaxial input here to run from my CD player to here, or this optical one, and then this RCA went out to my preamp or amplifier. That was it. That was all I needed. But look, DACs are improving and they're getting cheaper with more features. So again, this Fosse actually has XLR outputs, as well as this SMSL has XLR outputs. So if you're just getting started, there's a great chance that you don't need XLR. But if you have a preamp or amplifier that has XLR input and that's something you want in your DAC, that's another feature consideration to think about when making your purchase. And if we're going to talk about outputs, we may as well talk about inputs. And this is where DACs have really began to change. As more and more DACs are released and the price is coming down, they're offering more and more input options. With this Fosse, it actually has coax in and USB. It's got optical, and look at that. You can even plug HDMI into this DAC, which means you could connect it to your TV if you wanted to take your whole system to another level. If all you are using this for is a CD player, something very simple like the Modi is really all you need. Just make sure you look at the back of your CD player and ensure you've got an optical or coaxial output, because that's what you'll need to connect to one of these DACs. If that's it, you might save money by just buying something simple and not worrying about having all these extra inputs. However, if you're thinking about adding other components to these DACs, like a TV, the price difference has gotten so close between some of these that you might just want to go ahead and consider upgrading to something like this and having those extra inputs for you later on down the road. All right, now that we've decided what features are most important, we got to tackle the hardest thing, and that is trying to determine which design is best for us. Now, what do I mean by design? Well, every DAC has a different design, and there's so many options these days. There's Delta Sigma, there's R2R, there's 1-bit, there's RAW. There's which chip should you buy, ESS or AKM? Should you buy 1 chip or 2 chips, 8 chips, 12 chips? It's overwhelming. Your head starts spinning. I remember going through this when trying to decide which DAC I wanted to buy. So here's my short piece of advice on this specific point. We'll talk about sound differences in a few minutes. But just in relation to trying to decide which design you should get, just pick one. I promise you, none of these sound bad, and they're all going to be an improvement over the internal DAC in your player. Think back to the features that are most important. Start there. If you get the right features, just pick a design from there, and then once you start to grow in this hobby, you'll then start feeling more comfortable as to trying different designs later on down the road. Again, I'm going to talk about sound in a few minutes, but when it comes to design, just add it to your CD player. It's going to sound better than that internal DAC that you already have. Now, my third piece of advice is simply price. Set yourself a budget and stick within that budget. You don't have to go out and buy a very expensive DAC to hear sound improvements over the internal DAC in your CD player. You can start with a great budget DAC, something like this Modi. I think is $130 these days. I think this douk is $170. This SMSL maybe around $300, maybe even cheaper. I started with budget DACs and learned what that role of a DAC can do to enhance the sound of my CDs. And once I started to hear those improvements, I felt comfortable going in and buying an $800 DAC like this Denafrips Aries 2. And again, I'm going to talk about this a little bit more with sound, but it's okay to start with a small budget. It's going to sound better than the internal DAC on your CD player. Make a small investment. Over time, you can always upgrade, but if you just get too stressed out about worrying that you're not buying the expensive DAC that's going to sound the best, then you'll never hear what a DAC can do to improve the sound of your CDs. So set yourself a price budget, stick to it, and get in the game. Now, my final point here might be the spiciest, and that's because I'm going to talk about DACs and the difference in sound signatures. And I think this is where a lot of people make the biggest mistake. Now, the reason why this is so spicy is because there's people out there that think all DACs sound the same, and I respect that opinion. After all, this is just a hobby, and hobbies are fun when we respect each other's opinions. They only become not fun when someone's trying to say that you're right and I'm wrong, or vice versa. So if you think all DACs sound the same, I've got nothing but respect for you. But I've heard some subtle sound differences in these DACs that I've reviewed. I think this is where a lot of people just get scared about buying a DAC for their CD player because they watch a lot of reviews and they hear words like a warm sound signature, neutral, and they're just not sure what that means and what that sounds like even, and they just get overwhelmed and never buy a DAC. So my advice is to don't stress out about it. It's just like some of the other points. Just learn what a DAC can do for your CD collection, how it can enhance the sound. If you've never owned one before, I would advise just start with a budget DAC, because you want your ears to get trained to that before you jump up to something really expensive like a Denafrips Aries 2. Also, in reviewing a lot of DACs at $1,000 or less, I haven't had the chance to review any over $1,000. What I realize, and I think a lot of my reviewer friends would even tell you and agree to, is that when you're reviewing a DAC that's $500, there's not a double difference in sound performance. What I mean is the $1,000 DAC doesn't sound twice as good as the $500 DAC. It's often subtle sound signatures or sound staging, things of that nature that may be different, not necessarily better, just different based on your preferences. And oftentimes where that money that you just spent, that's in differing features. So again, it kind of touches on those points we were talking about earlier with features and pricing. This even bleeds over into sound. Don't get stressed out about thinking one of these sounds worse than the other or one sounds best. Get started, get a DAC. When you begin to learn how it impacts the sound of your CD collection, and if you get interested in wanting to upgrade over time, that gives you the ability to do so. What I find most people get stuck on is they narrow it down to 1 or 2 DACs and then they just can't make a decision. So I'd like to offer my help even further, and that is through email. Now, the first pinned comment in this video will be a link to my email newsletter. If you sign up for that newsletter, you'll get a confirmation email. Once you confirm, it will send you another email with my personal email address where you can email me any questions that you have in trying to decide which DAC is best for you. I will probably ask you a lot of questions in return as to what your sound system is like, what kind of music you like, all of those sorts of things, and we'll just kind of try to help narrow it down and see if there's one that you feel more comfortable buying after that email exchange. If you're already signed up to my email newsletter and you have some of those emails from the past, you can simply reply to those and they'll come to my inbox as well. But that's a way I'd love to be able to further help you decide which one is right for your player. Now, the other thing that most people get stressed about is once they buy a DAC, they're thinking, I don't even know how to connect this to my CD player. Don't worry, I made a video showing you how to make that connection. If you'd be interested in watching that video, you can do so by clicking here.